Mormon Stories is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies solely upon the support of people like you, its listeners. To help keep the podcast alive or to become a member of the community, please become a monthly subscriber by visiting mormonstories.org and clicking on the donate button on the right side of the page under support. All contributions to Mormon Stories are completely tax deductible and go towards producing the podcast and building communities and programs of support for Mormons like you. Thanks for your support.
Lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is November 4th, 2015, and I am very excited to have with me some really special guests. Today we're going to be interviewing Steve and Chris Holbrook, and it is going to be exciting. Now, Steve and Chris Holbrook are just really delightful individuals on their own right, and so we will be talking a bit about their journeys. And so this is going to be a Mormon Stories episode, but also this is going to be a Mormon Transitions podcast episode. So it's sort of a dual release. And, you know, those of you who listen to Mormon Stories may or may not know about Mormon Transitions. It's simply a more practical podcast to help people support them in their transition away from LDS Orthodoxy, either, into more unorthodox active Mormonism or inactive or post-Mormonism. And that's what Mormon Transitions is about. It's about helping people through that transition. And this is a dual release because we are also going to be covering the topic of community as a transitioning or post-Mormon. And that's one of the main reasons we brought Steve and Chris on. Steve and Chris weren't the founders of the Utah Valley Post-Mormon Community, but they are amongst the leadership right now in the community. And this is significant because the Utah Valley Post-Mo group has over 1,000 members currently. They have weekly activities from support groups to coffee meetups on Sundays. They do karaoke. They do fun activities. And it is a really important support community for transitioning and post-Mormons in Utah Valley. And we believe at Mormon Transitions that community is absolutely one of the top 5 most critical elements to work through and to cultivate as you are trying to figure out what to do after losing your literalistic belief. And so because this is probably the most successful post-Mormon community out there that I'm aware of, although there are some other great ones. We're going to be interviewing some folks from the Phoenix group soon, and we're going to have some other surprises as well. But it's such a successful community. It's doing so many good things. We're not only going to build awareness of this community, but most importantly, what we're going to be focusing on is sort of tips and tricks on how to build a healthy community. Because we know that there are, based on the Mormon Spectrum website, mormonspectrum.org, there are probably well over 120 face-to-face communities all over the world now in places like Dallas and Houston. Steve's saying there's more. We'll get to that. Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Boise, DC, Chicago, all over London. We could go on with all the different groups, but there's so many, and each one's trying to figure out how to do community right. Each one's having successes. Some are sputtering. Some are learning lessons, sometimes having challenges or difficulties. And so this podcast is sort of from 2 people who have really done it well. We're going to learn how to build and nurture a thriving community, maybe some things they've done right, some things they've done wrong. And the purpose and the intent is that people can look around where they are. Maybe they're in Cache Valley, maybe they're in Ogden, maybe they're in Salt Lake, and there are groups there already. Maybe they're in Sandy or St. George or Boise or wherever. Maybe they can take some lessons from these stories, from this podcast, from this series, and build a thriving community. Because whether or not you believe in Mormonism, whether or not you remain active, once you hit that phase of transitioning Mormon, and certainly if you hit that phase of post-Mormon, you're going to probably want and need some type of community. And so that's what we're going to be about today. And as a final thing, I haven't even talked to Steve about, one of the things I hope to take from this series is sort of a cookbook. Maybe we can get the people from Phoenix to be involved. Steve's already written up a really good outline. What we'd like to consider doing is releasing sort of the program notes from these interviews into a guide for building community. We can share it at Mormon Spectrum. We can share it on Mormon Transitions. And ultimately, if we put together a book on Mormon transitions, this sort of this content can become sort of a chapter for that book. And so that's the ambitious sort of work that we have before us with Mormon Transitions. But let's go ahead and welcome Steve and Chris Holbrook to Mormon Stories podcast and Mormon Transitions podcast.
John, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted that we've gotten a chance to kind of work with you and get to know you and to be able to call you a friend at this point. And so thank you for having us on.
My pleasure. And Chris, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So is there any preface, any sort of openings you guys want to give before we jump into your story?
Yeah, you covered part of it. We're here representing a group, Utah Valley Post-Mormons, that we happened to luck upon. We ran into it ourselves after being out for 26 years. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it was in existence and it was thriving. And we just fell in love with it and have loved to kind of pay it forward is kind of how we look at it. It's something that's giving back to a community that has given us an awful lot. Even though we transitioned, like I said, over 26 years ago, just knowing that we weren't alone. We felt alone. And there was this kind of missing thing of like having like-minded people that we could go do things with. And it has just been a blast. So it's a pleasure to be a part of the group and to help facilitate it. So that was kind of one thing. We'll give history in how the group got started and kind of give credit to the people who actually got it started. The other thing is we come from a mixed faith family. I have siblings that are still in the church whom I love. We have 5 sons, and we have 2 of them that were married in the temple. And so we have nothing but respect and love for people in our lives. Even though we come from different belief systems, our belief is that ideology should never trump love and that relationships are what really matter. So yeah, that's kind of the opening thing. And then you've mentioned Mormon Spectrum already, John, and you know I was involved in that along with my good friend Allison Udall, and I think that deserves almost a podcast episode to itself. So we'll just mention it, but we won't go into kind of how it all got started.
Yeah, for sure. And I've already talked to Allison about bringing her on, so that's also in the works, and it'll happen soon. So, but I'm not going to not mention it because it's too important. So
yeah, no, I agree.
It'll just be a teaser.
Yeah.
Show a little Mormon Spectrum leg, as it were. And two things I want to say before we jump into the story. One of the things I love about Steve and Chris is just how positive they are. I think in post-Mormonism, there's a lot of justified anger and frustration. There's a lot of fun and joy. There's a lot of different emotions and experiences. But one of the things I love about Steve and Chris is just how positive and thoughtful and compassionate they are. And I think that's going to come through in this interview. The only other thing I'll just say is that we are recording this interview both in video and audio format. So if any of the listeners want to see Steve and Chris in all their handsomeness and beauty, you can go up to YouTube, Mormon Stories, and check them out. All right, so let's jump into your story. Chris, why don't we start with you?
I'm a convert, and I guess at the time that I had joined the church was Steve and I are high school sweethearts. And when he had come home from his mission, I knew in order to marry him, I would need to join the church. So I went through the process of taking the lessons. And I do remember actually going up on a little hill, and wanted to get an answer. And the answer I know was in my own head was that there were good things that the church had taught and would be good for children. And so for me, I felt like President Kimball was teaching things that I could actually raise a family with, and I was actually okay with that. And so I came to the decision to join the church, and that way we could move on, even though I know Steve wasn't really gung-ho in me joining over this for him, but it worked. I joined, and it did bring us together.
So you joined at what age?
Oh gosh, what was it, 21?
21.
Yeah, 21.
Yeah.
Okay. But you guys met in high school, is that right?
Yeah, 16.
Yeah.
16 years old.
Where is this?
San Jose, Leland High School.
San Jose, California.
Yeah, San Jose, California.
Fun. And this is in the 70s, right?
Yeah, so basically seriously, this was my one and only boyfriend in the sense of going through high school, all through high school with one boyfriend. So
were you guys kind of Mormon hippies? Were you Mormon hippies at all?
No,
really.
We might seem like that now.
I'm kind of a hippie at heart.
Yeah.
We used to have like fights or discussions on whether a kite, flying a kite is a hippie thing, and it was kind of funny. But I love kites, and so, it was kind of funny that we had this.
I was so funny. I was in the Mormon mindset. It's like, well, that's just a waste of time. That's just,
hippies do that.
Hippies are the only ones that go fly kites. And I try to enroll all my buddies into like, get on my side of this argument. And then after we got married, we'd go fly kites.
Okay, and your three favorite rock bands were what? Were
Oh
who?
gosh,
musicians.
To be honest, I didn't really pay attention to a lot of that. I know that Steve did.
Okay.
But Steve would probably have more favorite bands than I would.
All right, we'll go to Steve next.
Okay, so James Taylor.
Yeah.
He was my man. And then in terms of rock, Led Zeppelin.
Oh,
Led Zeppelin. Wow. And Pink Floyd, and then we've kind of grown up together. We have tried to stay up with music.
Yeah,
we like Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah,
and we go to classical. I mean, it's just kind of a range of music.
Yeah. Radiohead, Modest Mouse. So later we became more enthusiastic.
Yeah, up with the times. Yeah.
All right, so high school sweethearts. Chris is a convert. All right, Steve, now tell us a bit about your background.
So you have to get that Chris came from German heritage, right? Her parents immigrated from Germany, and I had heard rumors about how tough it was to get to date the Schmidt sisters. Her maiden name was Schmidt, and her father's name was Wolfgang, and so he was known as Wolf,
the big bad wolf.
The big bad wolf, and who's afraid of the big bad wolf? And I was for sure, but. I kind of, fell in love with her, and it was funny. I mean, how we first started dating, I would take her to stake dances, and I was kind of already a bit of a renegade or something. I mean, the fact that I was willing to date somebody outside of the church, right? If you were really raised in the church, that's an iffy proposition. And but I don't know. We went to a couple stake dances. My
dresses were too short.
Yeah. She and her sister got kicked out of the dance because they had their skirts were too short. But all along I think she kind of got tired of me asking her questions like, well, have you ever asked these big questions like, why are we here? What do you think your answer is to that, right? And I would be probing her, and so I think she over time. Heard enough of that. She heard enough of that from her father, and so I was kind of like this next guy that she could kind of connect with or something. Mm-hmm. But we were way too serious in high school, and I would break up with her multiple times because I was always like, I felt like I was always like trying to tell you what was appropriate to wear and what wasn't appropriate to wear and all this kind of stuff.
Don't go braless.
Yeah, and it was like. Who am I to tell this person we're
Is that
way
too
too young
personal?
to start shaping each other. And so, we'd break up. But yeah,
He was trying to mold me into what he thought was appropriate,
yeah.
and that's okay.
But I was a pretty good Mormon kid in general. I had a great upbringing and inside of the church. I have nothing but great memories of my ward back in San Jose, the 12th ward, and it split into the 22nd ward. It's still in my heart, man. Those were great experiences, and the people from my life back then are still extremely dear to me. And I know for a lot of them, it breaks their heart that I've stepped away from the church. But I hope they know that I'm just as sincere as I ever was when I was a kid. And so, yeah. Anyway, we dated in high school, and then I, said I got to go away to BYU. My parents got divorced when I was 14, and so I kind of was for a while. I was the oldest at home. And so kind of helping my mom, I had a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. And I felt like I needed to get away. And so I went to BYU, and that was a great time for me to really grow. And even though it meant going away from Chris, and she didn't, this would be the first of a couple of times where I would leave her and go off because there was something I needed to go do in my life. First was going to BYU, and then the next one was a mission. But I kind of needed to sort out what I really believed. Being raised, I served in all leadership roles, and I was a good kid. I loved serving, and I loved my friends, but I didn't ever get that confirmation. I said a lot of prayers growing up, and I think the person that I was praying to was probably getting tired of hearing, "Is the Book of Mormon true?" And is she the one? Right? And I seriously, it was like almost every prayer was like that. And I would think that I'd get a confirmation. And then I would sort it out. It's like, no, that's just my mind just trying to tell me that, it is true, or something like that. And it's like, what is that? Is it? And so I could never really feel good about it. So I would say things like, I believe the Book of Mormon is true. I believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. But a lot of it was just really trying to fit in and not wanting to stand out too much. But at the same time, I really wanted to be authentic. I don't know. I've had this thing in me where I don't like to not be truthful. Although there have been plenty of times when I've not been truthful in my life. But I don't know. That's just kind of how I treat it. So when I went to BYU, I really tried to sort out, what did I really believe? And I kind of looked at the influences on my life at that point in time. And there were three things that I identified that were really clear to me that had shaped me. One was my family. The other thing was my church. And the other thing was my girlfriend. And I thought, okay, great. Those are all actually really good influences. I don't think they're bad influences. But who would I be if those things weren't there? Like, just in the raw, what would I be naturally? And kind of dwelling on that, I actually got to this amazing inner tranquility and peace and calm that I tapped into. It was like this well of wonderfulness. And then I tried to put it in terms at that point in Mormon terms. And it was like, oh, that's my spirit. Wow. And Heavenly Father works through this spirit, and the spirit exists in my body. And, I was going through trying to fit it all together. My body's my enemy. Be careful. It's really amazing, some of the things that we're raised with. It's like, but, we're looking back. But it was at the same time this wonderful calm that has been with me, and it helped me an awful lot as I transitioned as well. And we'll kind of get to that later. But it was enough for me to kind of figure out, I think I could go on a mission, right? So, I decided to go on a mission, and I went to Germany.
Now that's funny, right? Because that's where Chris's ancestors are from.
Right, I'm a Schmidt.
Right. So was that fun for your mom or dad to?
Yeah, I think it is kind of fun that they were able to speak to him in German. Yes. They have really strong accents.
Yeah, that was great. It was like, wow, I couldn't have gone to a better place as far as my life situation. That
We
was
actually
like
have one other son that actually.
John, our second son went on a mission. He went to Germany, and he
fun.
speaks so much better than I do. He's got like the native tongue. I think it's the DNA from him being half German.
Which I don't even have.
But what was funny, I'll tell a little story about her dad. I was doing working construction to earn money. And I would go to work. It was in the heat of summer with shorts on and a tool apron, and that's it. I'd take my shirt off, and I was working on a roof doing carpentry. And I went to the temple, and I came back the next day with long pants on, not shorts, and not just one t-shirt, but it looked like two t-shirts. And so all of my colleagues are like, oh, what are you doing? What happened? Oh, it's a special thing I just went to. And I told her father about this, and I said, it's kind of hard to talk about because, it's kind of a secret thing. And he goes, you don't have to worry. I understand completely. And I said, you do? And he pointed to his ring, and he had a mason. He was a Freemason.
Was it a skull? What was on his
I can't remember the details, but I just remember
square, a compass, probably.
Yeah, something like that, right?
G, maybe a G with the
something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's just that he was a Mason.
Yeah, so he kind of understood, and I had actually done a little bit of research. That was some of the first kind of breaking through to some of the real history. I did when I was at BYU. I was in the library, and I went to the special collections section, and it was like you couldn't check books out, right? But you could just go browse and sit down at a table and look at books. So I just went browsing. I found something about Masons, and fascinating, right? But in my mind back then, it was like, well, Joseph just kind of restored something that was already on the earth, but it was very, very clear that it came from the temple ceremony, came from the Freemasons, and that they were pissed at him for A, going through too quickly himself, but B, bringing in his congregation. And it was supposed to be non-denominational. And there are Masonic lodges to this day who will not allow Mormons to join their lodge because of that history. Amazing. But anyway, so yeah, I went on a German-speaking mission. I love learning the language, but I honestly, people talk about the best 2 years of their lives. I loved learning a culture and all that, but it was tough. It was different than what I expected. I was going to go share my heart in this wonderful tranquility inside, and I was then being form-fitted into a salesman for the church, with quotas and how many Book of Mormons I had to give out and, that kind of thing. So that was a little difficult. I actually kind of pushed back a little bit and really tried to do the mission the way I had envisioned it, which was to actually talk with people and not necessarily cram a discussion down their throats, so to speak. And I got in trouble because I didn't ask all the questions in the lessons, and I was honest with our statistics. It's like, nope, didn't teach that many lessons. Well, why not? I didn't answer all the questions because we can't count it as a lesson unless you ask every question. So I just don't ask all the questions. It's like, well, you need to ask all the questions. Like, I can't, and that goes against my heart. I could never do that to someone. I'm there doing my best to understand them in a foreign language, but communicating with them. If I said something like, you might as well send a tape recorder on my mission for me if I'm just going to be regurgitating some memorized thing.
Yeah, you were trouble.
Yeah, I was trouble, but I was told that from a missionary, an assistant to the president, I got visited by the AP guys, right? And one guy was like this automaton who I just did not look up to at all, but the other one was this wonderful, almost Buddhist type guy that I was like, he mesmerized me. I loved how he held himself and everything. And he told me in this this visit that Bruder Holbrook, you are the most unselfless missionary out here.
Meaning selfish?
Meaning selfish. And he says, because you always talk about going against your heart, and it goes against me, and you need to let that go, and you need to follow what the mission has set out. This is what you need to do. You need to align with this. Send those poetry books home. And that floored me. I felt like, man, I really, that was my whole foundation for how I interacted with the God that I believed in, was through my heart. And it's like, wow, maybe I've really built on the wrong foundation. I need to go look at this. And I seriously was bawling. It was one of the low points of my life. I thought somehow I really messed up. And I remember still to this day saying the most fervent prayer I've ever said in my life, saying, you know, I don't know what to do, Heavenly Father. This is what how I've always dealt with you, is I've trusted my heart. It's kind of like my Leahona, and I'm being told that that's wrong. And in the prayer I said, if it's like this where you are, I don't think I belong there. I don't think I can. I don't think I can. It would go against my heart if I had to line up and have obedience be the number one thing. I wouldn't feel comfortable there, so I don't even belong. And in a heartbeat, that was actually a wonderful moment for me, because it really set me back on a path of being authentic and being genuine. And I just did my mission the way I wanted to do my mission after that, which is very heartfelt, being there for people, being there for other missionaries. Because I had a lot of focus on other missionaries because it was a tough mission. You know, my older brother went to Mexico, and he filled up 2 journals. I fill them up with, another door knocked in our face, this kind of thing. And he didn't even do a journal. He just filled it up with baptisms, names of people. And I had 1 baptism on my mission. So anyway, but all my missionary companions knew I kind of loved Chris. I would pull out her picture every once in a while, and it's like, oh wow, can't wait to go home. And when I finally went home, it was pretty awesome. I feel for my mom. Here I hadn't seen her for 2 years, and I'm like hugging my mom, but my eyes are gazing over at this beautiful woman who is still there, and it was great. She put together our first date for us coming back home. Me coming back home. She had gotten tickets to go see James Taylor.
Whoa!
At an outdoor theater in Berkeley, and it was really, really awesome. And we dated for a little while, but then it was like something like, I remember talking to my mom. I said, Chris has always been kind of my golden lady, but I don't know if it's going to work out. I just didn't know if it's going to work out. And that's when Chris kind of was seeing me maybe walking away, and that inspired her to go talk to the missionaries. And then, I remember sitting around the corner listening to the missionaries teaching her, and I thought, oh, they're using all those sales tactics that I know. Oh, they're putting the pressure down on her. Oh man, this is somebody I really, really care about. If she's going to convert, I really want it to be in her heart, not for any external reasons. And when she told me she wanted to get baptized, I said, I don't believe you. And she goes, well, one day maybe you will believe that I'm
so
sincere.
Chris,
this.
talk a little bit about that. Were you converting for him? Did you feel like it was your own process? And what was that like?
Of course it was. I wanted it to work between us. It's hard to differentiate that. You know what I mean? It's hard to separate that. It's like, you want this to work out, and I was good with the teachings. I was really a health nut, so it's not like I was doing any kind of drugs or, I wasn't into drinking and all that, so it was not that big of a deal to me. Word of Wisdom was a really big selling point for me, kind of thing. I did when I when I did join the church, it was really upsetting for my mother, and my dad told me I had to leave.
How old were you?
Phew,
21.
And you were living at home?
Yeah, but it's really interesting because I get emotional here, when I talk about some of this stuff. But anyways, even at 20, it's more like I was a 16-year-old. So I was, you know what I mean, younger, well protected. So I was younger than my age, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And so I actually moved in with the head cheerleader's family who was Mormon. And they were very nice to take me in, and they actually had me pay rent to teach me responsibility. And then when I took off to BYU, they gave me all that money back.
Wow.
So yeah, it wasn't like they wanted my money. They wanted to teach me to be responsible.
That is so cool.
Yes.
I love that.
And we actually pass that on whenever our kids come back. We make them pay rent, but then we save it and do the same thing, because then they leave with a little nest egg. So they were really great people, and yet there was tragic stuff that happened to the mom that let me move in. She actually was in a fender bender and got in her car, and she decided she had to move the car out of the way for the tow truck, and the tow truck ran into the car, locked the car, and ignited it, and so she burned to death.
Oh.
Yeah, that's horrible.
In the car. And this is a very, very good woman.
Yeah.
And
So
to
to be
have
safe.
such a tragic thing happen to her, and her daughter actually had to watch her,
Yeah.
and this, basically perish there. That was a hard thing. But anyways, I did take off to BYU on my own, and it's just a scary thing to do, but it was probably really good for me. I have to say that on my side of the family, we have a lot of problems with alcohol, and I actually say the church has really helped me there, where I didn't have that kind of experience early in life where I had problems with that. So there's a lot of things that I am grateful for in the word of wisdom in the church. That was a helpful thing for me.
Okay. And so, Steve, what was that like for you to have her join the church?
Well, it's really funny because in my heart, I had dreamed about this as a kid. It's like, wow, that would open the door for us to get married. But this really seems strange looking back on it, but I broke up with her when she joined the church, if you can believe that. Here she was, kicked out of her house, and her boyfriend, who we'd been boyfriend girlfriend puppy love for 2 years, and then he leaves. I left, and I was like, what? I look back, I can't believe how horrible I was. But part of it was, I told her not to wait in cold storage when I was on my mission, and she didn't. Right? She went out and dated, and I remember she some guy bought her a dress or something, and I had this earlier in my life. I had a problem with jealousy, and it was just like, I've really learned my lesson. I remember I went and no, it was a dress. I said, where'd this come from? And it was like, oh, this guy got it for me. And I went, oh, okay. And then I disappeared, and I come back with my hand broken because I went.
Oh.
I went to go hit a mailbox. It was one of these mailboxes in the shape of a house.
Ouch.
And I thought I was going to make it, disintegrate into pieces of wood, and it stayed. But at any rate, we ended up going. She went to BYU. I thought it was actually a great thing for her. And then I went out to. This was 1980.
Okay.
And I went out to surprise her for Valentine's Day. And
why didn't you go to BYU, Steve?
I was actually home working.
Okay.
I had to kind of pay my way through school. And so this was after I got back from my mission. I needed to make a little money. I was going to San Jose State.
Okay.
In the evenings. So I was still kind of going along with my education. But That prayer that I was always asking, I went out, and when I first set eyes back on her, we were in front of the law building, and it was winter, and it was like a snowfield, and I was looking all over campus for her, and somebody said, "Oh, I think she's got a class in the law building," and I saw her, and it was like this. It was just so wonderful that we connected again, and it's like our relationship just kind of transcended time for me in that moment. I felt like I'd known her longer than I'd known her. And in a Mormon mind, that meant I've seen that face somewhere before. We must have known each other in the pre-earth life. But what really hit me was I feel like I actually spun the clock forward and experienced the closing moments of my life, sitting in a rocking chair, and actually feeling the joy in that moment. And I know it's going to happen in my life, having lived a life with my sweetheart. And that hit me all right then. And it was like, that was pretty damn obvious to me then. I didn't even ask her to marry me. It was really funny. We just kind of knew. And I said, so timing's kind of an interesting thing. What do you think? That's all he said. I didn't do the get down on your knee and any of that kind of stuff. She goes, I said, what do you think about timing? And she said, I think, what about May? I said, well, we have to wait a year because if we're going to get married in the temple, you have to wait a year. And she's going, well, like May next year. I was going, that's like over a year waiting. And as it was, we got married in December.
Why did you have to wait a year?
I had to be a member for a year.
Oh, okay. Got it.
To get married in the Oakland temple.
Yeah, okay.
And so my parents were outside the temple. And so was his dad.
As was my dad, right? And that policy, that's just a policy. And that so needs to change. I think the church has come close. The leadership has come close to changing that policy. I really hope they'll come through with it because it's just unnecessary. I mean, my father-in-law, Wolf, the big bad Wolf, could not walk his daughter down the aisle and hand her to me, who he trusted me. He grew to love me. And that was just unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And I apologized to him later. But you know what? Karma's a bitch. we couldn't be in two of our sons' weddings.
And my neighbors were kind of interested, like, why wasn't it a big deal for me? And I in my mind, it's like, I know what goes on in there. And also, it didn't bother me because I did the exact same thing to my parents. Yeah. So I told my kids, do what's best for you.
Yeah.
I'll be fine.
We had a lot of understanding and empathy for both sides. But it is kind of interesting that we experienced kind of not being able to be there ourselves. Yeah, how did we get there, right? So we got married, and a month after we got married?
We got married in December, and I was pregnant.
A month later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember I got maternity insurance. I had to make sure we had a maternity clause with the insurance, health insurance. And the insurance agent was saying, so what form, if I may ask, what form of birth control are you planning on using? I said, well, we're going to use the rhythm method. And he said, you know what we call people who practice the rhythm method, don't you, in our business? And I go, no, what? He goes, parents. And he was right. Chris was delighted to share this news with me, but it was like I went into shock. It was like there's nothing more that I wanted to be in life than a father. So I wanted that to be there, but I wasn't ready. I didn't have all the answers. And I couldn't provide. I had 4 years of school ahead of me, right?
And I just thought you get married and make babies. So
yeah. But so we ended up having 5 sons. We raised 5 sons.
Wow.
And
2 in, 3 out right now.
And they're just wonderful humans. They just are the light of our lives. Yeah, they're wonderful.
And their ages right now are what?
Let me see. 34, 32. What's Andrew? Andrew's like 28, and I think Christian's 26. 27,
27.
and Kelton is 25.
Okay, all right. So
We're empty nesters.
Four of them all had birthdays last month. So
in October.
Wow.
Yes.
There is some rhythm to your method.
Yes. It's Steve's birthday. Steve's birthday is January 30th. And we
9
always
months
had
before
babies 9 months.
Always getting lucky on your birthday.
Yeah.
Well, you get it other times?
No, that's it. That's it. Just my birthday.
My sister called up and said, "Could you give him something else for his birthday?" So she figured it out before I did.
Once a year, whether you need it or not.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you guys are raising your kids in the church, and what happened?
Yeah, what happened?
I actually came up to Steve one day and said, "Aren't we supposed to be doing something?" Because in my mind, I thought there was things that, I didn't know my P's and Q's, being a convert. And he was busy reading. You were reading stuff I didn't know what you were reading, but he was reading a lot.
Yeah, that kind of came a little later. When we were at BYU, though, I don't know. I mean, I was an elders quorum president. I was, doing all the right things, but I hated how people would bore each other in church. I couldn't imagine. I'd see these old guys hearing the same lesson, getting up on the whiteboard or chalkboard back then and writing out, okay, repentance. What does this mean? What does it mean to you? It's like I'd heard that already 20 times in my lifespan, and these people were there for 80 years. I couldn't imagine it. So I'd always challenge my instructors to look at the manual once and then let it inspire you, but then find something that really is away from that and actually deals with our lives. We were all BYU students, so we had a lot in common. But I was telling Chris before, I thought we were pretty regular going to the temple. She goes, I don't remember that much going. But I remember joking about how should we go catch let's do a movie and dinner, because we'd go eat in the Provo Temple cafeteria. So that was kind of the joke, right? That you'd go catch a movie and have dinner. It was a movie that I saw quite a lot. So I didn't get as much from the temple. I always wanted to, because my dad, who was actually excommunicated twice, but he loved the temple. The temple was like one of his favorite places on earth, and he equated it with being out in nature. And he loved nature, being out in the mountains, and he would have all this tranquility. And I would get in the celestial room, and it never. I would always wait for it. Maybe I had too high expectations. Maybe it was more subtle or something, but it never really came. And I don't know. I found then us not going to the temple out of our own volition. The only thing that got us to go to the temple is a friend was getting married. It's like, oh shoot, my temple recommend's about to expire. I need to go in and do the interview, and I would do that, and stop on the questions about do you ever associate with non-believers or things like that. And I was already wondering. It's like I don't even know where I'm at, but I'll answer the questions appropriately. And at some point, it was Mark Hoffman was kind of my gateway into our exit. A good friend of mine called me up and says, you need to read this book. It's Mormon Murders. And it was all about the Mark Hoffman, kind of the salamander letter and the forgeries and being found out and killing people with bombs and things, which was horrible. But I said, why do you want me to read it? And he goes, well, I'm really frustrated with the church leaders because they were absolutely aware of what was going on, and they denied it under oath. They were kind of covering up their awareness and their involvement with Mark Hoffman. And I went, okay, that's interesting. And so I read it, and I was kind of fascinated by that. And what I was really amazed at is the salamander letter, which actually I had a friend in college who had a copy of it back when it came out. It was actually being distributed. People had copies. And he told me about it, and I said, that sounds so bizarre. What, a white salamander that was talking? It was like, this is weird. And there were church leaders who came to his home and demanded that they give the copy of the Salamander letter to them. And he refused. He says, "No, this is my copy." And I didn't know anything about it. But when I read the Hoffman book, it was kind of like, how did he know how did he know that was the kind of creation, a forgery, that was bizarre enough, but somehow fit in, that church would buy it, that the church would go, "Wow, gulp, this is a weird thing from our history. Yikes, let's buy it," and then stuff it away someplace. But I wanted to know what got into that guy's mind, what made him think like that. And in that book, it said that he read Von Brody's "No Man Knows My History" while he was on his mission in England. And I thought, the nerve of the guy, first of all, that's clearly anti-Mormon. And he read it on his mission. That's ridiculous. But I knew I needed to read it. And I remember I went to Barnes and Noble and was in the aisle where they had those kinds of books, and looking around side to side, afraid someone was going to even see me in the aisle, and then seeing the book and grabbing it, pulling the spine out, and then quickly sticking it under my shoulder and walking to under my arm, walking to another area to kind of thumb through it so no one could see me looking at it. It was that, you get that kind of paranoid about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And anyway, I bought it, went home, and I devoured it. And I'd stayed up till 4 a.m, and I was shocked and dismayed at what I learned, history that I'd never heard of before. And I remember I was really kind of down in the mouth or something at work, and a colleague said, "What's going on, Steve? You're not normally like this." "Oh, I just read this book. It's just horrible. I don't know what to do." Told her what the book was, and she goes, Oh, I've read that. You need to read Mormon Enigma." The story of Emma. And it was, basically the same material. I read it, and it was the same material. It was just kind of told from Emma's perspective. And I remember all along trying to keep my testimony intact, whatever was there. But I would never let my brain actually take on the possibility that this was all a fraud.
Yeah.
That Joseph was a fraud. And the moment I jumped that synapse, and our brains were trained really, really, really well to never go there. You just don't go there. That's dangerous territory. Don't even contemplate it. And the moment I did, it was like lightness for me. It was like, wow. All of that effort, my whole life, I was 30 years old, trying to fit in. It was a wonderful feeling because I finally got, it wasn't me. I wasn't the one that was faulty. And I felt like I finally arrived on the planet. I was like, wow, I'm 30 and I'm actually here now. This is my life. And I get to do with it what I want. And I looked myself in the mirror and I took my garments off. I said, I can't wear these anymore. It was really that crystal clear to me. I didn't go through the kind of numb phase, any of that. I just went from believing to not believing, really, really quick. But I still couldn't put it down. I still bought all kinds of books. I was just fascinated with Mormon history after that, and the real history. And so I don't know. We still were going to church.
Okay, now how old were you at this point?
30.
Okay, all right, got it. Okay.
Yep.
For me, it was just a relief. Like when I realized we weren't going to be going anymore, it was like, wow, I can just relax on Sunday and enjoy my kids. So I didn't have a problem with not going because it was like I didn't have any have-tos anymore. It's like I can just, do whatever we would enjoy to do on a Sunday. And it was, so I obviously was not so engulfed in it, that I couldn't give it up. I guess I wasn't bonded.
Right. Okay. So you guys were kind of on the same page. You didn't have to deal with sort of tons of conflict.
Yeah, I think if I were LDS, it would have been a fight.
If you'd been raised,
Yeah, if I would have been raised in it, it would have been like, I understand, I empathize with all the, what do you call it, mixed faith families right now that are going through this pain. So.
Totally.
Yeah, and frankly, I don't think I would have done this kind of interview with you, where others who are believers in my life would be able to hear this, unless the church had come out with the essays. Unless the church had actually come out and said, a lot of this stuff happened, we haven't talked about it. And so that, to me, I'm fine with people becoming aware of all these issues that are in the essays and hearing the church's explanation for them. And if they can remain believing, that's great. But I hope that they have a little more empathy for people who came across this information and for whom it was too difficult to remain believers.
Sure.
And that, we're not out to get the church. A lot of people think that instantly we're anti-Mormon. It's like, no, I'm not anti-Mormon. I love Mormons. I'm anti-Mormon heritage as opposed to Mormon history, right? The heritage is that kind of glossed over, nice. It's just like American heritage. We tell great stories. We legendize our past because it's where we came from. And to shine a light on the dark corners of our past is shining a light on our dark corners, and we don't want to do that. And I don't know. So I'm kind of relieved that the church. I mean, God bless the internet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so you guys were out by the time your early 30s, right?
Yeah.
And so what? So you raised your kids in Utah as what? A mixed faith family, sort of?
Whatever they wanted to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even know what I was, so it's like, what do you guys think? And so we left them with figuring out themselves, and some of them, met girls they wanted to marry and joined, and that's fine.
It was the one thing I was most concerned about, John. Frankly, it was like, wow, all right, this is weird. I live in Utah Valley. Mm-hmm. I've got 4 sons. We had 4 sons at the time. I said, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? And we still had kind of family pressure, when they got born, the blessings, and they turned 8. I baptized my son. My first 2 sons I baptized when we were still believing. Andrew I baptized after I stopped believing. This was really strange. I baptized him. But I didn't confirm him. I asked my older brother to do the confirmation, and my justification was I at least had the belief system of a 16-year-old, because priests can baptize.
Right? Yeah, sure.
And so I could wind back the hands of time. It's like I was just a 16-year-old baptizing my son, and then we didn't baptize our last 2 kids, and. I actually was a primary teacher when I had my kind of enlightenment moment or faith crisis, whatever you want to call it. And I went to my bishop right away and I said, you know what, I don't believe anymore. And I said, but I still believe in love. I think that's why we're here. And he goes, man, I know, I understand. I know a lot of the history. I have my own issues with Joseph a little bit. He was very honest with me, and he said, so I get that, but we need people like you. We need people like you to stay in and really get the essential of what the gospel is all about. So please, please, please keep teaching. And I said, okay, okay, I will. Here's the deal. If there's something that comes up about Joseph Smith or something that I just don't believe anymore, I won't have that. I won't come out of my mouth.
Right.
Because I'm fine with that. And, I dodged and weaved in it was just primary. So these were kids, but After doing that for, I don't know, 8, 9 months or something, I kind of went back to the bishop. I said, you might be okay with this, but if their parents found out, they would probably be going, why is this guy my kid's primary teacher? And I said, please, I'm done. And he was all worried. He thought, well, Steve, you're gonna be like in this boat that set off to the ocean, and I'm worried I'm never gonna see you back.
And we're living.
And I said, I have a sail. I've got a rudder. I'll be fine. Yeah. But he was dear to me. He still is. I'm still really close to him. I refer to him as Scott, as opposed to bishop or president. He went on to become the stake president. But, but it was weird, kind of, the kids, for a while, we noticed that some of the kids, when they were younger, they couldn't come over. Their kids' friends,
Right.
friends couldn't come over to our house. It's like, that's weird. Stuff like that would happen. But in general, they had great friends, and most of their friends were in the church, and they still accepted our sons as dear friends, and they still are dear friends, no matter what. And so this, it worked out fine. I know a lot of people get really worried about that. We run into that in the post-smoke groups, is what do we do with our kids? I said, well, we raised 5 sons. They turned out really okay. We kind of taught them essentials like the golden rule, and that really life is up to them, however they want to make it. And so they really felt like they had some freedom to kind of figure out life on their own. And a couple of them chose to go the route of the church, and we supported them in that.
Excellent. So, at what point did you? So for how many years were you just kind of disconnected from all Mormonism in any sort of really explicit way? You know what I mean?
Yeah, probably a good 20 years.
Okay, so from your 30s, early 30s through early 50s?
Yeah, more or less. We didn't go to church anymore. I filled that time with trying to really figure out a meaning for my life that was real. And that was actually wonderful. It was my life, and I figured it out. There were a couple of things that mattered to me coming out of Mormonism that stuck. Mm-hmm. One was the phrase, men are that they might have joy. Mm-hmm. And the other one was the notion of eternal progression. And I thought about my life, and it's like, what makes me happiest, really, the deepest joys that I experience. And I thought about joy in general, and how there's joy that we experience in our body, like just tasting great food. That's joyful. That's a wonderful experience. The joy of exercising, coming back from a run or doing something. It's like, the endorphins that you get, and then joy from sexual intimacy. Those are all body joys, and they're fantastic, and they're kind of short-lived. They feel great for a couple moments, and then they're kind of short-lived. And then I thought, yeah, there's this other kind of joy I experience. It's when I use my mind to go put a puzzle pieces together, or figure out a hard problem, or just learn. And that's a joyful experience. It's like, wow. And that actually lasted longer than the kind of body joy for me. But the joy that meant the most to me was the joy of relationships and people. And I refer to that as heart joy. And it's like, if I could fill up my life full of joyful moments, that'd be a great life. Even if that's it. And I really, at that point, I developed to not believing in an afterlife anymore. I don't even hold out for one. It doesn't. A lot of people think I'm crazy. It was rare that someone would come up to me who was in my life, who knew I was no longer going to church, who would ask me why. They were afraid to. They didn't want to come talk to me. And I didn't go into long explanations. I said, I just read some books and I just don't believe anymore. I wasn't trying to take them away. And when they said, well, you've got to believe something. What do you believe? I said, well, I believe in love. I think that really makes a difference in the quality of life. When you have a lot of love for other people, that feels wonderful. And so I don't know. I that was great for me to kind of like figure out that that's what mattered to me in life, and it helped kind of be a guideline. Um, yeah. So did that. Looked into science. Read all kinds of books. So it was really fun. I enjoyed that. It was like, I was on this exploration about life, and it was really up to me. Total freedom.
And Chris, you weren't like freaked out, or my kid's going to be okay, or are we going to be okay? Am I going to lose my marriage? Like, were you able to ease through this transition without a lot of fear and trembling, or was it hard for you?
I didn't find it hard in the sense of there was supposed to be in some religion. For some reason, religion for me, I was able to put together right away. I mean, when I had questioned one, I was able to look at Christianity and say, well, boy, that's, for me, that's all made up. And I realized it's just man-made. So it was easy for me to realize that religion in general wasn't working for me, and I found a lot of peace in nature. And I have to say, I love Margie's her how do you say the stuff, her writing,
Her blog post,
post, because they I meld right into them. They're just so beautiful. She does such a wonderful job writing, and I hope she keeps doing it, because I totally enjoy her nature writing.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I didn't find I found peace in nature. So if I wasn't out running, I was out biking. I prefer mountain biking because you are out in nature, and it's just beautiful up there. So I feel very at peace in nature. Nature nurtures for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And raising the kids and your marriage, you were feeling leaving the church in and of itself. That didn't freak you out in terms of whether you could stay happily married and raise your kids okay. That wasn't.
It was not a problem. I felt like a kid myself, so I was still kind of. Your kids actually raise you when you think about it, because we're just kids raising kids, and
Sure.
so I really felt like my kids were teaching me the lessons, and just be there when they need you. Be there when you need to, because they will need you. But to tell them who they should be is kind of silly. They are who they are. Their life longing for itself, and that's a Kahil Gibran poet.
That's good.
Yes, life yearning for their own selves. So I really believe that they're beautiful kids, boys.
Nice.
Yeah. I kind of made a few mistakes in my life and during that period. I got on with Novell, and I loved it. I finally was a breadwinner, and I just fell in love with it. It felt so great. I have to say that when I first took off my garments, Novell was probably 90% Mormon at the time, and I was just paranoid that people would see I didn't have garments on. Right, so I'd like wear sweaters and things so that people wouldn't tell that I was away or something. But you grow into kind of being more at home with just really being authentic as to who you are, and that took me a while to figure that out. But once I figured that out, I didn't have as much tension when I'd interact with people that were believing, because it was like, no, this is just who I am, and that's who you are. And I'm not going to let that all get in the way of our relationship, right? I learned that a while ago.
That took some landmark.
It did take some. So we did go. I worked too much, and Chris, would like. I was a workaholic, and Chris would make dinner for these 5 wonderful sons, and then Dad wasn't there. I wasn't there, and I wish I could have those years back, because. I fooled myself into thinking I was just doing it for the family. If I were really doing something for the family, I would have been there for the family, not off earning a paycheck.
Yeah, but you're building a career too. So
yeah, I was building a career, all that. But the truth is, and you used to tell me this, that time is love, And I'd say, well, but you got to know that I love you regardless, no matter what. And we went through a little tough time. Men and women come to intimacy in different ways, and so we kind of,
had our struggles.
I caused pain in Chris, and she caused pain in me. We came really, really close to getting divorced. This is like in 95 about.
It took counseling.
Yeah.
And Landmark.
Yeah, we went to Landmark Education. It was good. We pulled it together, and I really think that answer to my prayer, so to speak, or that vision of what life's going to be like at the end of my life, sitting with her, pulled me through. It really did. It was like, doesn't matter. All this stuff doesn't matter. We have each other. We both have made mistakes, and we didn't have the church anymore as something that was going to help us through or be our motivation or whatever. We just had each other, and that was enough.
There is some truth that religion and children are both glues in a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And when you lose religion, that's part of the glue. And then when the kids go, that's part of the glue. And so you can pull apart. If I look at what keeps us together, I look at it as respecting our differences and actually, honoring those differences. And I think what we needed in our marriage was we needed to actually give each other the space to grow up, to know ourselves. And so if you can stand back and say, oh, this person needs some space. And if you can give your spouse that, it really is their choice to be there or not. And I think
But what if they don't choose to be with you?
That's okay. That's a choice. You love a person enough to let them go.
I came really close to leaving, but I not that close, but it was, I'd never even contemplated it. I came from a broken up family, and I didn't want to. There's no way I was going to do that to my kids. It's funny. That's the exact same thing my dad said, because he came from a broken home, and he said he'd never, And so I was like, for sure, not going to make those same mistakes my dad made.
Yeah, you really wouldn't want someone to stay there because they feel like they're imprisoned too, right? You want them to be there because they, in spite of all, they love you, or they enjoy your company with or without your warts, whatever.
Right.
That you accept that person.
I have warts. Yeah, she knows I do.
We all have our things. We all have our things.
Huh. Well, that's cool. And I think I almost want to bring you back another time just to talk about how you made it through that hard times. Because honestly, I see a lot of couples who, they come to me with a crisis of faith, and oftentimes they're in the same place. Sometimes they're not. And sometimes we're able to work through their crisis of faith. And I often just sort of default to think, oh, well, happier ever after. But sometimes the marriage really starts to fray, and the couple has to stare into the possibility that they actually will divorce even after they've both made it through a faith crisis. And I tend to want to still see all marriages stay together, and I know that's not realistic. But at the same time, I have this bias that maybe if there's enough good there that a couple might be better off staying together, especially if they're kids, than they are thinking that they might chase after something that might be an illusion. You know what I mean?
Well, I think a lot of times people are there because of their belief system. They found each other with the belief system, and without that, there's nothing left. So if they don't have anything to enjoy with each other that is not in their belief system anymore, it would be hard to stay for that reason. And I don't think it's that bad of a thing to let people move on, as long as you realize that you're actually respecting each other and raising these kids together and showing that you can respect each other at the same time.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you guys were able to make it through, so good for you.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, cool. So at what point did you start feeling like you wanted to reconnect to Mormon community in some way? How did that talk us to how you started needing and wanting to look around for Mormon connections again?
We kind of backed into it a little bit. We had friends we'd go do things with. Some of them were LDS. And we tried to plug ourselves into other communities. We volunteered at the Sundance Film Festival. We joined a wine social, which was fun. And so we did have some circles of friends, but it wasn't quite like community. It wasn't really until Prop 8 happened that the inner activist in me suddenly just got off the couch, and Prop 8 was just a bridge too far for me in the church. I witnessed people getting callings, to be on phone banks to call 2 states away into California to encourage them to vote for Proposition 8. And, which is against gay marriage. And I had a gay friend and a lesbian friend, and they are dear friends, and they're real, and they did not choose to be that way at all. And it made no sense to me. And I actually got very, very frustrated with my heritage, with the institution that raised me, to the point of actually 4 days after Prop 8 passed, I sent my resignation letter in. That was it. Prior to that, I'd been out for 20 years at that point, and it didn't matter to me if my name was on the records. And but suddenly it did matter to me because I didn't want my name associated with that institution. And I in my resignation letter, I know they don't really read these things, take any messages to heart, but I had a message which was basically, I don't understand how an institution that in its past had a non-mainstream form of marriage that they were trying to push the government to accept, right? And they were the federal government was the enemy of the church because they weren't allowing polygamy to exist, and yet here are these people who love each other, who wanted to make a commitment to each other, a legal commitment. They couldn't do that because they were gay, and there's non-mainstream marriage. You're going to ruin marriage. It's like, excuse me, you guys talking about ruining marriage? You were really, really blowing the thing up, the institution. So, at any rate, that got us out of our seats, and we ended up going to vigils and to protests, and and then Facebook happened around that time, or we got on Facebook. This is around 2007, when we were already kind of fighting for gay rights. Here we're heterosexuals, but we were fighting for it. And then when Prop 8 passed, it was like such a letdown. And but it got us online and in Facebook groups, and I started hearing.
You found out about
people were talking about the Mormon Church, and so I'd start hearing things about Mormon churches. So here I live in Utah County, I hear about it all the time, but I didn't really dwell on it anymore. And I heard about this mass resignation that was going to take place. This was in 2012. And a woman named Zilpha, I had no idea who she was, it was just a unique name, was going to, she had organized this thing with her husband, John, Zilpha Larson and John Larson. We didn't know who they were. And we went, I said, hey, hon, they're going to do this thing at Ensign Peak.
I knew it was a hike, and so I was excited to go hike.
We get to go on a hike. Yeah. And I said, yeah, but there's a lot of people are saying they're going to resign from the church. Holy smokes, I know what they're going through.
Let's go support them.
And let's go support them. And so that was already kind of a community move. I didn't realize it, that I had a longing in me to be there for people as they were transitioning.
It was actually fun because we hiked up to the mountain with a group of people we didn't know, and they would tell you their stories as you're hiking. And it was so interesting to hear their stories as you're walking up the mountain.
Yeah. And they would ask me what my favorite podcast episode was, and I go, "What are you talking about? What podcast?" And they said, no idea. "This is John and Zilpha Larson. This is Mormon Expression." I go, "I don't know what that is."
They were shocked.
and we didn't know Mormon Stories. We didn't know anything, John. We had just been we were done and weren't dealing with it anymore. And on the way home, I don't know, we downloaded some podcast episodes from the most recent ones at that time in the summer of 2012, and just fell in love with the Mormon Expression podcast. It was like, wow, these people get we've gone through, right? And we had never found anybody who identified with us and got our story at all. It was, it was like we felt alone, and we were like these misfits in Utah Valley. And so
all of a sudden we had friends in our living room.
Yeah, the podcast, we turn them on all the time, and we were empty nesters, and we were home for Christmas. I had time off, and we just listened to the backlog of John and Zilpha's podcast. By the way, they would talk about you, John. They would say, "Oh yeah, John DeLynn," and it's, sometimes you're like, "Oh, that guy, he's wishy-washy, he's all over the place. He's in, he's out, I don't know what he is," kind of thing. And but there was also this sense of like, you had a great listenership and they had a great listenership. I got the sense that it was like this competitive thing. It's like, so I checked into you seem to get a lot of really big name people, and I went and listened to a number of your interviews. You were extremely thorough. We loved them. But at any rate, we, then we found out that John and Zilpha kind of quit doing the podcast. And we went, oh crap. Here we found out about how they'd gone on a cruise, they'd gone to Vegas.
That we all missed.
You missed all the fun.
We're going, where were we? Why we? These are our people. And we got in all the Facebook groups at that point. And it was called the Mormon Expression VIP Lounge at the time, which now is just called the Mormon VIP Lounge because
you ended up talking to John.
John ended up, he said, they started doing their podcast again, recordings. And he goes, I'm going to do a live recording. We had actually gone and helped them move, and because they were getting divorced. And we went to the first podcast recording we went to was their divorce episode. It was really bittersweet because here's this couple that we were in love with, and now it was the end of their marriage. They were very generous to talk like they did about it, because I think a lot of people learned from that episode. But after it was done and the mics were off, I talked to John after, and I think the world of him. I think he's just brilliant. And I said, so John, all these online groups are great. I have this revival now. It's like I've been dormant away from Mormonism for 20 years or more, and suddenly it's like I'm connecting with my people. I'm connecting with people who get it, but online's kind of cool. But is there any kind of like in-person things around that you're aware of? And he goes, you're from Utah County, right? Yeah. Look up a thing called CALM, Community After Leaving Mormonism. And I went, okay, cool, I'll look it up. And I went home and I looked, I did a Google search and I found this old website that was like dead. It was like a ghost town. It was from 2009 was the last thing that happened on it. I went, oh crap, so much for that. Dang. I was hoping there'd be a big community. Then I opened up a wider web search and I just looked for like ex-Mormon support Utah County, something like that. And up pops the Utah Valley Post-Mormon group on meetup.com. And they had an event the next Saturday. It was a barbecue. And I said, hon, do you want to go to this? And we went to that barbecue and, met all kinds of really cool people who we're really close friends with now. But it was like, wow, these are our tribe. Hey, here, we've been in Utah Valley the whole time. How long? You guys been in existence? What's the deal here? And it changed our lives because we, someone told us about a secret Facebook group. I go, oh, secret? This sounds eerie. How do I get in? And they added us. And the next week they had a CALM meeting, a Community After Leaving Mormonism support meeting, where people could, you sit in kind of in a circle and new people tell their stories. And other people listen and kind of offer support, and was like, we got to introduce ourselves and give our story.
It's actually
and hear
my
other
favorite.
People's stories.
I have to say, CALM is probably one of my favorite things to do. I'm so honored to hear these people's stories that they're willing to open up their hearts to us and tell
them. And we're going to cover that in depth.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But it was, that was the beginning of our involvement in the Utah Valley Post-Mormons. At the end of that calm meeting, someone said, we really need a place to hold our next meeting next month. And I looked at Chris and said, yep, we'll do it, kind of thing. And then we started hosting things at our home and, kind of taking from there. So anyway, that's how we got to Utah Valley Post-Mormons. And what a great moment that was. And our life hasn't been the same since.
Yeah. All right. Well, so this sort of wraps up the first segment of this interview. Does that sound right, Steve and Chris?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I think it's perfect.
So thank you for sharing your story with us. And just to sort of let our listeners know, what we're going to now do is we're going to end this episode and start a second one. And the second one is going to be all about just sort of Steve and Chris's experiences in the Utah Valley Post-Mormon group, but we're going to go into a very practical discussion about good things that community can do, lessons learned, best practices. We're going to go into description about these calm meetings and the other events that they hold, and we're going to have a deep dive talking about community. But I guess maybe before we end this segment, maybe we should end this segment like we often do. You guys may be caught off a little bit off guard. You've shared with us a lot of what you've learned and what you've felt through your journey, but why don't we go ahead and end this segment in the traditional way and have you guys just share, sort of in closing, as you've shared with us your story. If you were to share sort of a non-religious or even a secular testimony now, why don't we go ahead and end this episode with you guys sharing what you would want to leave with our listeners. Let's just say your kids are listening or your grandkids someday listen to this, and you were to share a few nuggets of wisdom of a life reflected upon and maybe even well lived. What would you guys share? And I'll let you guys pick who goes first.
Oh, I'll go ahead. Because mine will be short and sweet. I actually have this pledge down in the one of the rooms in the basement. That's a pledge to this earth. And if I knew it by heart, I would say it. But anyways, I really find peace and harmony in nature and the beauty around us. And life is right here. Enjoy it. I often think a lot of people are waiting for the next one. If there is, then great. But if there isn't, give back to whatever you want to give back in this one, because that will bring you joy. And that's it.
All right. Beautiful. Thank you, Chris. All right, Steve.
Yeah, gosh. We already have grandkids. You said that grandkids might listen to this. So hi, Sophie. Hi, guys.
Future Sophie.
Yeah. Future Sophie. This is Opa. Life is really about joy. It's really about being present to the beauties that are here right now and the beauties that are found in every human being that you encounter. I fully believe that any human that walks this earth is full of love and light inside that has just been covered over by hardships in their life or by, in some cases, dogma. But there are layers that are built on top of kind of their genuine, true light and life and warmth that's inside. I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't subscribe to it. I don't think there's any indication that there is one. I get why people hope for it. But for me, it's kind of like, it was really hard as a kid growing up. It's like, I can't imagine not existing anymore. And it's like, well, I will exist. The essence, the thing, the deepest part of me, which is life, that life spark, will continue on. And that's not a personal thing. That's not me. That's just life. And life absolutely will live on. I'm going to live on through my genes, through DNA, and through My memes, kind of the things I've taught, those will stay around and be carried on forward. And through love, through the love that I put out, I thoroughly believe that that's an energy that lives on. I don't get woo-woo about it, but I really think that all I know is empirically, it's the thing that gives me the most joy in life. And so, yeah, men are that they might have joy.
Beautiful. All right. Well, Chris and Steve Holbrook, thanks for this first episode of Mormon Stories. We'll sign off. We'll let the listeners join us in the comment section on mormonstories.org if they want to share any comments or thoughts. And then we'll come back in just a few minutes for part 2, where we talk about building healthy and sustainable communities. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Sounds wonderful.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us make more like it by becoming a monthly subscriber at mormonstories.org. Music for this episode was provided by The Lower Lights.
When other sources cease to make me whole, when with a wounded heart, anger or malice, I draw myself apart, searching